772? Not 772 soldiers, 772 Space Marines who rammed their own flagship into a planet-sized Necron weapon, walked inside on foot, and fought for 100 hours against tens of thousands of machines that do not die. 6 made it to the end. 6 set off the charges. The Imperium called that a victory. I call it butcher accounting. But here's the part nobody talks about. The most effective sacrifice on this entire list wasn't made by a Space Marine. No power armor, no Primarch blood, no divine engineering. Just one man who had already died more times than he could remember and chose to do it again. 5 missions, every one of them documented. Every one of them filed under acceptable losses, the ones people signed up for anyway. Tell me in the comments, which version of Olanius hits harder? The simple guardsman who had no idea what he was walking into, or the perpetual who had died 100 times and chose to walk in anyway? Subscribe before you start typing. The world engine was a Necron construct the size of a planet, not planet-sized as a metaphor. A moon with engines, Gauss projectors capable of scorching entire worlds down to bare rock, void shields that made every Imperial weapon in range completely useless. 15 Space Marine task forces tried to crack it. Drop pods bounced off. Boarding torpedoes failed. Teleportation beams scrambled on contact. The best military force in the galaxy spent weeks firing everything it had at something that didn't notice. The Astral Knights looked at that problem the way you look at a wasp in your car. You don't open the window. You drive into a wall, walk into the wreck, and kill it by hand. They rammed their flagship into the world engine at full speed. The ship survived the impact, barely. Enough for the chapter to board the surface. 772 Space Marines against a structure larger than most continents, filled with machines that stand back up after you kill them. The Astral Knights didn't hold a perimeter. There was no perimeter. They moved forward and destroyed everything they found. Flux generators, weapon forges, command nodes. Every system they took offline weakened the world engine. Every corridor cost more of them. 100 hours. By the time Chapter Master Amhrad reached the final objective, 5 brothers were left standing beside him. 6, counting Amhrad, out of 772. The math was clear. Had been clear from the beginning. He detonated the Melta charges anyway. The world engine's shields collapsed. The 15 task forces waiting outside finished the job. Billions of lives were saved on the worlds that had been in its path. Inside the wreck, an Imperial shrine was raised. 772 statues, one for each Astral Knight. It still stands today, guarded by volunteers from the chapters who fought alongside them. Chapters with no obligation to guard it, who do it anyway. A chapter that calculated the cost, agreed with the math, and went. Most people on suicide missions don't know they're on a suicide mission. The information is unclear, the orders are vague, the commanding officer is optimistic for reasons nobody can justify. Most people walk into something terrible believing, at least partially, that they might walk out. Sanguinius didn't have that option. He was the Primarch of the Blood Angels, one of the Emperor's 20 sons, engineered to be effectively divine. Wings like an angel carved from white marble, a presence that made rooms go quiet. Considered by many, including his brothers, to be the finest of the 20. And he had a gift none of them fully understood. He could see the future. Not impressions, not instincts, specific visions, precise enough to be architectural. Before he boarded the Vengeful Spirit, Horus's flagship, the last confrontation of the Horus heresy, Sanguinius had already seen exactly what was going to happen. He'd seen the darkness. He'd seen the moment Horus's hands connected. He'd seen the outcome. He walked toward that ship anyway. By the time he reached Horus, Sanguinius was already broken. He'd fought his way through the flagship while wounded. He'd faced Kabanda, the bloodthirster who had broken his legs at Cygnus Prime, again on the walls of Terra, and won that time. He was running on something that wasn't strength anymore. The fight itself was short. Horus, carrying the full weight of the ruinous powers, was something that shouldn't have had a weak point. Sanguinius found one. A single crack in Horus's armor, a structural fracture small enough to miss, carved out by the last thing Sanguinius had in him. That crack, that specific microscopic flaw, is the reason the Emperor landed a killing blow minutes later. The entire Horus heresy. 10,000 years of galactic civil war, billions dead, worlds burned, Primarchs corrupted, the Imperium brought to the edge of annihilation. The reason it ended with humanity still existing is a fissure in a piece of ceramite made by a man who had already seen that he would die making it. He scheduled his own death. He showed up on time, not Primarchs, not chapter masters, not heroes with names carved on monuments in gold. The men of the death course of Krieg. Here's something that takes a moment to understand. In every military that has ever existed, in every culture, every era, every war ever fought by human hands, the officer class has one core function. Stop soldiers from running away. Enforce discipline. Put a bolt pistol against the spine of the man whose nerve broke. That's the job. It has been the job since armies were invented. In the death corps of Krieg, commissars carry the same title, hold the same authority, wear the same coat, carry the same pistol. Different problem. Krieg commissars are assigned to restrain soldiers who are too eager to die, not metaphorically eager, practically eager. Soldiers who break formation to charge alone, who volunteer for the most suicidal assignments before the briefing is over, who treat the concept of surviving as vaguely disrespectful, as if making it back alive is an insult to whatever they think they owe the Emperor. The commissar's job on Krieg is not to hold cowards at gunpoint, it's to hold the line on soldiers who consider getting shot a reasonable Tuesday. Hardened commissars who have executed deserters across a dozen campaigns find the assignment to a Krieg regiment quietly disturbing, not because of the death, because of the enthusiasm. During the Siege of Vrax, a 17-year campaign on an armory world that had fallen to chaos, the 261st Siege Regiment was assigned to take the main gates of the Citadel. The mission was described in the briefing as suicidal. That was not a warning. For the 261st, it was a selling point. They sent wave after wave of infantry companies into those gates. The first waves died. The remnants of 5 companies reached the walls. Chaos Space Marines and Demon engines broke them. The regiment was destroyed. Folded into the survivors of 3 other regiments, what was left continued the siege. 14 million guardsmen died at Vrax over 17 years. The Death Corps sent more. They always send more. Here's what the Administratum understood before anyone else did. A mission with 0 survivors generates 0 after-action reports. No complaints, no trauma, no one coming home asking whether the order made sense. For the bureaucracy of the Imperium, 0% survival isn't a catastrophe. It's clean paperwork. Cadia was a planet positioned at the mouth of the Eye of Terror, the largest stable warp rift in the galaxy, a wound in reality through which chaos poured like water through a broken dam. Every few centuries, a Black Crusade would spill out of that eye. Every time Cadia was the first thing it hit. Every time Cadia held. For 10,000 years, 10,000 years of being the cork in the bottle. Generation after generation born, trained, deployed, and buried in the same dirt their grandparents died defending. Children on Cadia learn to field strip a laser gun before they learn to read. The fortifications aren't structures, they're geological features. The people aren't soldiers by choice, they're soldiers by birthright. Not a single Black Crusade broke them. The 13th didn't break them either. Abaddon launched more force than had ever been assembled in the history of the Long War. Warships beyond counting. Traitor legions. Demon engines! He came with everything, and the Cadians met it at the wall, and held. The planet's surface was catastrophic, yes. Cities burning, trenches lost and retaken, losses that would have collapsed any other world's will to fight. But the Cadians held. Cadia fell because Abaddon picked up a Blackstone fortress, a structure roughly the size of a moon, a weapon of the ancient Necrons, already crippled but still massive beyond comprehension, and aimed it at the planet's surface. Not fired it, aimed the entire object like a thrown rock. The planet's pylons, ancient Necron constructs suppressing the eye's influence for millennia, shattered on impact. The crust split. Cadia imploded. The Cadians didn't break. The planet did. Lord Castellan Creed vanished in the final hours. His last confirmed words were not a prayer, not a farewell. They were, "Cadia stands," which was, at that moment, empirically incorrect. The Cadians who survived evacuated. They carry the phrase with them across the galaxy now, tattooed into skin, carved into armor, spoken at the start of every battle. Cadia stands, past tense dressed as present, a planet that no longer exists, still holding, not a mission, not a choice made in a briefing room, an entire civilization that agreed over 10,000 years that the alternative was worse than dying, and then died anyway when the math finally ran out. Every entry on this list has been a Space Marine chapter, a Primarch, a regiment built to absorb attrition. People designed or culturally conditioned to walk into the impossible. That's the pattern you've been watching build. Olanius Person didn't fit the pattern. The legend goes like this. At the climax of the Horus Heresy, aboard the War Master's flagship Vengeful Spirit, the Emperor was losing. Horus was standing over him, and a man stepped between them. Not a Space Marine, not a custodian, a man, a soldier, a guardsman with a laser gun who had absolutely no business being in that room, facing something that had already killed a Primarch 20 minutes earlier. Horus destroyed him, but the Emperor saw it happen, saw what his favorite son had become, saw Horus kill something fragile and mortal, something that had no power and no hope, and stepped forward anyway. And that sight was what broke the Emperor's hesitation, what gave him what he needed to do what came next. A simple man, unknown, unnamed in most versions, standing in the wrong place and refusing to move. The Imperium built an entire theology on top of that refusal and called it proof of divine will. Here's what the legend doesn't tell you. Olanius Person wasn't a simple man. He was a perpetual, one of a rare class of humans who die and return, over and over, across centuries and millennia. He was approximately 45,000 years old. He had died more times than most civilizations have had centuries. He knew what Horus was. He had seen enough of history to understand exactly what was in that room and exactly what would happen when he stepped into it. He stepped in anyway. Which version is worse? The guardsman who didn't know? The pure, clean sacrifice of someone who had no idea what he was giving up? Or the perpetual who knew exactly what death felt like, had felt it dozens of times and chose it again with full information? The Imperium built its saints on the first version, because that story is easier to carry, easier to paint on chapel walls, easier to tell children who are being asked to die for something larger than themselves. The second version is harder. A man who knew precisely what dying cost, who had paid that cost more times than anyone alive, who understood better than anyone in that room what it meant to stop existing, and who decided, one more time, that it was worth it. In the end, the math is the same. 0% survival isn't a planning failure in the Imperium of Man. It's not a mistake in the briefing or a general who miscalculated. It's a number that appears in the documents, gets acknowledged, and then gets filed under acceptable. The Astral Knights knew it. Sanguinius saw it in visions. The Death Corps of Krieg built an entire culture around welcoming it. The Cadians inherited it as birthright. Olanius Person had died enough times to know exactly what it meant. They all went anyway. The Imperium didn't lose anyone on these missions. It spent them, deliberately, carefully, in full knowledge of what the cost was. Every one of them let it,